What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be interviewing Pastor Jady, because Jady is back in the building. And before he comes up, let me, for some of you, you don't know who Pastor Jady is because you started coming in the last 6 months, and you're like, who is this said Pastor Jady? And what is a sabbatical? And where did he come back from? So let me just kind of give some context real quick. Pastor Jady went on a sabbatical, and what a sabbatical is it is a time for us to trust in God and rest in Him. It comes from Leviticus 25. That's one of the places that we see it. And what God commanded the people to do was, hey, in this year of Sabbath rest, you're not supposed to harvest the food that you've grown, the grapes. You're supposed to let everything in the land just sit. And that was a big, bold move for the people to do. You imagine being a farmer and you don't farm for a whole year and you're supposed to still eat. So it was a major faith move to trust God that He would provide for the people and that what He would do in that year of rest for them would make it better for years to come. And so what Pastor Jady did is he stepped into a major faith move and said, hey, I'm going to take a sabbatical after 18 years of full-time ministry, taking my first sabbatical, and I'm going to trust God that He's going to, I'm going to lay down the work of my hands for a season, and I'm going to believe that God's going to do a work in me, in my family, and in our church because I'm putting my faith in Him. And it's been a beautiful experience for him, which we're going to hear about. And it's also been a beautiful experience for us as a church. When our leader steps into something, steps out in faith, we receive the reward of that. He goes before us, and so we now get to receive the blessing that he also got to experience, okay? So would you do me a favor, and would you welcome Pastor Jady to the stage?
Oh, what's up, everybody?
Man, it is so great to see you again. I've seen him all the time because he's one of my closest friends. Man, we're glad you're here with us.
Thank you.
Can we just welcome the Griffin family to Liz? We love you. I'm not going to ask them to stand because, there's some injuries going on. But Sophie, Kevin, Tate, Ines, we love you guys. We're glad you're here. We missed you guys a lot. So we're going to hear about your sabbatical.
Yeah.
And, I want to start out with something simple. Like, what's some fun things you got to do, man?
Yeah, we got to have a lot of fun. A couple fun trips. We went camping in Rocky Mountain National Park. If you've been there, it's like a breathtaking place. Got to do some vacationing with the fam. Got to spend a lot of time in San Diego. We have some dear friends there, and they opened up their home to us, and we stayed there. And I also did a lot of cowboying. Yeah, which it's kind of the hidden known fact about me is that I moonlight as a day worker cowboy. So got to go wrestle some cows and have a good time. And
there it is. I knew we would know when the cowboy photo showed up.
Yeah, it was there. So got to have a good time and almost get bucked off horses. Just do the thing. So it was fun. It was a blast, actually.
All right. So when you weren't cowboying,
right?
And when a Sunday morning was happening,
yes,
you've been.
We went to church. We did. We went to Greater Mount Zion, and it's a church in East Austin. It's pastored by a guy named Galen Clark, who's a dear friend of mine and a mentor, and it's already starting.
That's good. That's good.
Church was great. It was a blast. It's yeah, it was really beautiful to be a part of a church where I wasn't doing anything, you know. I got to come late. I got to feel what y'all do, you know. Like we like show up, you know, like 10 minutes late. I'm like, oh, I get it. This is why people do it. Like, this is nice. You know, this feels good. And yeah, we just got really loved on there. So like the first week we showed up, he pulled me on the stage, and so people knew, you know, who we were, and they just loved our family and loved us, and it was a really beautiful time. Missed you guys tremendously, and yeah, you know, I think being back, like it was so, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a very emotional person. And I think for most of my life, I was kind of ashamed of that a little bit. Appreciate you. Thank you. So, it's just kind of really overwhelming to be here. And I think sometimes when you hear overwhelming, it can like have like a negative connotation, like, oh, I'm overwhelmed, you know. And but it's more like that's not at all the vibe. It's like it's just I'm just really thankful. And you know, sabbatical. I know Chris has questions, but I'm a preacher, so I haven't done this in a long time. I haven't been on a mic in a while.
I had one question, which was, hi, how are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Sabbatical, you know, I said this before I went on the sabbatical, but I had a pretty negative view of sabbaticals, if I'm being really vulnerable with you. If you came to me and, you know, and and I've apologized to Chris Padgett like 17 times, probably 27 times, because he was always talking about the importance of these things, and I would just be like, bro, I just feel like this is something that weak pastors created to take extended vacations. You know, like that's really what I thought. Like I didn't have any space in my heart or in my mind to even like, what is this thing that people talk about? And then you throw in that oftentimes people go on sabbaticals when things aren't going well, right? So like they're having a personal issue, or they've been a jerk to their team, and so everybody needs some space. And so I was like, I either saw it as like a disciplinary thing that needed to happen, or a extended vacation thing. And I was so shocked by how tender God was to me in correcting my misunderstanding of the purpose and the importance of the season that I was in. And think you could think about sabbatical similar to the gospel. It's like death, burial, and resurrection. It would be kind of a framework of kind of what it felt like. The first little bit, I was just trying to figure out how to unwind. And I don't think I was aware of how distracting life can be from how you're really doing. And, you know, you get over not having anything to do, at least a guy like me. I was kind of ready to come back in about 72 hours. I was like, I think I'm good. You know, like I slept in, you know, this is nice, read a book.
What's sleeping in for you? I know you.
6. And so, you know, slept until 6, felt really refreshed, and was like, all right, let's go, you know. But what ended up happening is that, you know, silence is an extraordinarily powerful thing. And I read an enormous amount of books, and maybe like I can put out like a list of the books I read or something. And one of them was called The Desert Way, and it was actually written by like a Catholic priest on these desert fathers that would like go and be by themselves in like silence and solitude for longer than I could handle it. And so I started trying to practice this thing called silence, and you realize how noisy everything is and how just like noisy you make your life so that you don't have to deal with silence. Like we're rarely ever like quiet. And I remember I would go on runs, and I started being like, all right, I'm not going to listen to music while I run, and to force myself to be with myself. And, you know, I think Carl told you guys a couple of times, like, the challenge of a sabbatical is not that it's not being alone, it's learning how to be by yourself, like with yourself. And I, in the silence and the vacuum of not having anything that could prop me up emotionally, like no, you know, high fives or like, hey, that was a good sermon, or just the jolt of excitement of a great conversation or connecting with somebody, and I'm just kind of there, I realized like, man, I am really, really sad. And I was just driving, and I was just like, got overwhelmed with just sorrow. And I think I just started to realize, man, there's a lot of disappointment in my heart that I didn't know how to deal with. And, you know, everyone experiences disappointment, right? I mean, things don't go the way you think. You don't get the job you think you're going to get. A relationship you thought was going to last forever doesn't. You know, like this disappointment is all around us at all times. And I love taking steps of faith. I love it. And, you know, so we've taken a couple big jumps as a family. You know, we planted a church in Seattle in the early 2000s, which, geez, we're old. You say it like that, 2000s. You're like, man, the early 2000s, we planted a church.
That's almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like,
it was a long time ago, man. Oh, this is so beautiful. Did you make this yourself? You did? It's nice. I think, and then we went and helped plant a church in San Diego, and then we went back and helped in Waco, and then we felt like God called us here to plant a church here. And every time you do something where God is calling you or drawing you, whatever language you want to use, right? Like, there is holy expectation that gets baked into that. right? God speaks to you and he shows you like, hey, this is what's going to happen. Or you get like a window or an expectation in your heart of how things are going to transpire and what's it going to look like. And that's a beautiful process of dreaming with God and leaning in and, and learning how to believe in faith and, pushing forward and saying, man, we're not going to despise the days of small beginnings, and we're going to keep believing and praying and sharing the gospel. And I think what I didn't realize is that my faith was actually a little bit more contingent on breakthrough than I would have preached. I would always, I'll tell you like, man, we believe in who God is, not what God does, right? Like, that is something that I absolutely believe, said, but I think deep down in my heart, there was a little bit of a contingent of like, man, well, we did this, and it's not looking like we thought it was going to look, or this didn't happen the way we thought it was going to happen, or, specifically here is like, COVID like beat our face in, and it's like we didn't see that coming, and we, it's just kind of like, and there was just a lot of disappointment in my heart that honestly I didn't even know was there. I because I'm such a lean forward faith guy, I was just leaning past it. I don't even know if that makes sense, but like I wouldn't allow myself to even go there, right? Because it's just, no, we're going to keep believing, man. God's not done. And he's not, right? But there's this beautiful thing in God that I realized that like he is so into your process of restoration way more than your effectiveness as a minister. Like he cares. We say it, but I don't think I believed it. That's some of the tension I've expressed to Chris is like, how do you tell someone that you have been transformed? And they're like, how? And literally it's like, it's because I think I'm starting to believe that God likes me. And it's so elementary, right? It's like kids' church, like what Jordan's preaching right now, probably, And you're like, how do you say that? He's like, it took you 6 months to get there, You're like, yeah, and I'm still kind of figuring it out too, Like I don't know if I even got there. So a lot of what I felt like God was doing was unpacking for me a lot of pain just because of life, like just life can hurt, things can happen. And I realized like, man, I don't like to grieve. Anybody else not like to grieve? And like, so again, when all you have is yourself, you have like a lot of time. I started like learning to pay attention to what I was feeling, which I never had done before. And for someone who's emotional as me, it's hilarious.
How did you do that? Like, just give us
how did I?
The Easter run. Tell that.
Oh, okay.
Give us an example of how you did that.
Yeah, so Easter Sunday, it's kind of like Super Bowl Sunday for pastors, and Are you sure I can use this to wipe my face? Okay. And Easter Sunday, I like to say, can get you through the next 6 months, It's because, everyone shows up, everybody invites their friends, the room's full. It's like we always do something fun for the kids, and you're trying to bless the neighborhood, and it's just it's a shot of arm in the arm of yo, okay, yeah, this is happening, things are going. And I have been a part of Easter Sunday service since I was a teenager, because when I was a teenager, I was on the worship team at my church, and then when I went to college, I was on the worship team, and then became a leader. Then I started working for churches, and so I had been involved in planning or helping with Easter services for as long as I could remember. And here I am on Easter Sunday, and the fam went to church, and I just felt like I was supposed to stay back. And so I'm on a run, and I am no music allowed. And it hits me like it's the first, and I would often run on Sunday afternoons, like that's just something I do. And it hits me like it's the first Sunday afternoon jog that I'm on that I can remember where I'm not evaluating God's favor on my life based on how many people showed up. And on top of that, God just started speaking to me that he was just really proud of me. And I realized, dude, I have a hard time receiving that. Because when you haven't done anything, and God's like, man, I'm so proud of you. You're like, I got up, I made scrambled eggs, I skipped church, right? I liked it. You know what I mean? You're like, I get why people come once a month, you kind of get different perspective. It was very revealing for me, because that's when I started to realize that there was this tangling that was happening in my heart between my work and my worth. And I started describing it as a spaghetti bowl, because it's not as streamlined as you would think it is. And starting to unpack it, it's not like it comes out smoothly. It's like they're all connected and in together. And that was probably one of the biggest breakthrough points for me, was realizing that. Because I would, I'm a pastor, I'm a driven guy. It's so funny, my therapist, before I started meeting with him, he gave me all of these psychological assessments. And some of them were hilarious questions, like, do you enjoy losing? I'm like, who says yes? Who answers that question? Yes, I love it. I love losing. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. So I'm judging the guy. I'm like, what a waste of time, And then he writes this report where it's like I'm looking in a mirror, and the dude's never sat in a room with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, you got all of that from me saying that I like to win, But he sat with me, and he made these graphs. And the interesting thing is, the first thing he said to me was hey, Jady, great to meet you. I was like, hey, Tony, great to meet you too. And he was like, you're pretty hard on yourself, aren't you? And I started crying, which doesn't take much these days. I can't listen to country music. I start crying. I can't watch Aflac commercials. I start crying. It does not take a lot, so if you need a good cry hug, I'm your dude. Just come see me. Just tell me a story. We'll weep together. It's good. And he's like, I'm going to show you something. And he pulls up these two graphs that make no sense to me. And he was like, hey, you see this little dot that's kind of sticking out higher than all of your other dots? I was like, yeah. And he's like, you want to know what that is? I'm like, sure. He says, that's your drive. He's like, you are an extraordinarily driven young man. And he called me young, and I felt good about it. And I was like, thank you, Tony. I'll pay the full price, And he's like, you're extraordinarily driven dude. And I was like, yeah, I am. And he's like, all right, now look at this other graph over here. He's like, you see these dots that are sticking out higher than everything else? I was like, I do. He's like, you want to know what those are? I was like, sure. He goes, that's your motivation for your drivenness. He's like, that's kind of the gas pedal, is this over here is driving this over here. And he was like, you want to know what that is? I was like, sure. He goes, that's shame. And before the sabbatical, if you were like, hey, do you think you deal with shame? I would have said, I don't think so. Like, don't we all a little bit, like I wouldn't have identified it as like this thing that I needed to lean into, but I can look you all in the face today and say, like, I think that's probably the only thing I deal with now. Like, it's like now that I understand what it is, it's like, wow, this thing has been a massive part of my life. And shame can wear a lot of different hats, but for me, shame would be a lot of constantly feeling like I'm not good enough. No matter what I did, right? It didn't, if it was sports, if it was school, if it was this, and it just kind of bleeds over, right? Your things you do change, but the motor of your brokenness revs the same. So it shifted to church because that's what I did, but the thing that was happening in me was not like new to church. And so it's like I never felt like I was good enough, or never felt like I could achieve enough, and it was just this felt like this constant thing in me. And I learned to channel that into drive, right? Like, okay, I'm going to work harder than anybody. And, you kind of get that little, I love underdog stories, and everything like that. And you get this kind of chip on your shoulder, like, yeah, tell me I can't, And all of that is just like a mask to cover the fact that your heart is corrupted by this thing called shame that's eroding your ability to receive grace. Because grace is the unmerited favor of God. It is just the love of God for you because of who he is, in spite of who you are. And so if you have a shame motor, they can't run together. They fight against each other. They don't work together. And I started to realize, like, oh my goodness, like, this is affecting every area of my life. This is affecting how I interact with my kids. This is affecting how I interact with my wife, with my team, with the church. And it was this constant lie of just like, you're not enough. And I realized, just like really vulnerably, that, everyone looks at churches that are like growing and, and we're like, oh man, they're like, the favor of God is on them. We say that, right? And like, not even in a negative way of just like, man, God's favoring them, or like, man, God's on that guy, or God's on that girl. Like, man, look what God's doing. And so what I started to do subconsciously was be like, okay, well, God just must like them more than he likes me. If their favor is up here, and their favor's connected to their work, and we're down here, then God just must like them more than he likes me. And the unraveling of that is something I think I'll be doing for the rest of my life. I think like sabbatical is the beginning of a process. It's not the conclusion of one. I feel like I've been given a new operating system, and I'm not a tech person, like at all, which is kind of funny. Like, I used to be accused as a tech person. I'm like, guys, I don't even know how to use my iPhone. Like, I don't know what to do. I can take a picture. But like, I don't have social media. I don't know how to do stuff. I remember one time, Jimmy, who's the leader of our movement or whatever, is like, hey man, can you do like a reel on Instagram really quick? And I was like, bro, I have no idea how to do that. Like, he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, man, like, I don't know what you're talking about. But what I understand from people who are techie is that when you get a new operating system or you install new software, there's like, you have to learn how to operate with that new software. So I feel like the software has been installed, but I'm still learning how to actually walk out in it, and to begin to stay as much untangled as I can from my work and my worth. And I think the thing that has been helpful for me in that is I I read a book called Beholding, and I guess we can post about it, people that know how to do that. And this book was written by a guy who was a worship leader who got like super, super sick. And for like 3 years, he was bedridden. And he realized when he had like nothing to do all day, every day, and he was like, wow, I really want to learn how to pray. He realized like, man, you run out of words really quickly when you're just trying to pray all day. And I'm a big list pray guy. You know, I like to look at it and say that I'm done. I think it keeps me accountable. I like driving at things that we want to see breakthrough in, and all that stuff is right and good and has its place. But on the sabbatical, I realized like, man, I don't think I really know how to pray. So I would kind of discipline myself to spend at least half the day like in some sort of heart work. You know, I'm going to stay off screens and stay unplugged from music and like be with myself at least for, you know, a good 4 to 6 hours and like just have to figure it out. And this book was like mind-bending for me because it talked about this practice that's been around like since the beginning of Jesus, and it's just like beholding God as he's beholding you. And literally I would just sit on my back porch and I would just say like, God, I just want to like behold you. And I want to experience you beholding me. And I would think like, how do I look at my kids, you know, when they're not being idiots, which is like 10% of the time. I'm joking, y'all are awesome. And I would think about how there was literally nothing that they could do successfully or would be seen as a failure that would affect how I feel about them. There'd be 0 if they got 100 on a test, or a 0. How I look at them and what I feel when I look at them does not change at all because of what they did. If they were the starting quarterback or the backup, if they were, you know, whatever your thing is, you know, we all have that place where we like really want someone to see us. And we think it matters how we perform in that moment, right? Like we think it matters. And I was, I saw this video. Don't judge me for this. Well, you can. I don't care. I saw like this video clip of Mike Tyson. You guys know who Mike Tyson is? The fighter, kind of a controversial figure, to say the least. And I didn't know much about Mike Tyson. I don't follow boxing. But from this video, I started kind of digging in a little bit because he was asked about this trainer that he had. It was this old white dude in his 80s, I think, when he met him. I think his name is Cuss or something like that. And, right? Cuss, something. And he just like took him in, this street kid who no one could control and no one saw any potential in. And he just took him in and just loved on him, believed in him, started feeding him, like just became a father figure, became a dad to him. And it's about 7 or 8 years into their relationship, he dies. And in this video, Mike Tyson is asked, hey, if God showed up right now and gave you a computer and you could write Cuss an email, you could ask him anything or say anything to him, what would you say? And he starts crying. And he said, I think I would ask him, how did I do? And I heard that, and I just like started crying, because I was like, that's exactly it. Like, that is what every heart is asking. And it's exactly why the Father in heaven looked at Jesus and said, well done. Because if we're asking that question, somehow in the mystery of Jesus, there was a question mark in him and his humanity as well. How did I do? And when you behold God beholding you, you're allowing your heart to have that question answered with his pleasure and like his joy and his simplicity. And I think I had made life so complicated, and it's like really simple. You know, it's just like love God and let him love you. And it kind of really all works out. And so much of life and sin is to try to keep that from happening. Is to break that down, to break down your ability to receive his love, or to think you can't receive his love, or to get you to believe a lie that he doesn't love you, so that we begin to act out of our need to have that question asked, and we start trying to get that question asked by everybody else, answered by everybody else. And you know, I think that over the next few months, and I want to encourage everybody, October 8th, right? 2 weeks, I'm like real deal preaching for the first time in 6 months. So I'm a little fired up, all right? I feel like this message I wrote it like 6 months ago. Not really. But I want to encourage you to come, to invite your friends, invite people you've never invited to church, because I feel like God's given me a word for us as a church. And I'll give you a teaser if you promise to come back on the 8th. And that is that we're entering into a year of Jubilee. And the interesting thing is that the year of Jubilee is on the 7th year, sabbatical year, every 50 years. And actually on October 8th, we're celebrating our 7th birthday as a church. And when God gave me this word that we're entering into the year of Jubilee, I actually didn't know that. I'm bad with numbers, apologize. And actually, Emily told me this week, oh yeah, we're celebrating our 7th birthday. I was like, wait, what? I was like, God, you are real. I was like, but the thing about the year of Jubilee, and that there's a lot of aspects of it, but overarching everything, it was a reset. It was a reset for the people of God. It was a realignment culturally, economically, relationally. It was a reset over everything. And that reset had a dramatic effect on everyone who knew people who were Israelites. Because they were asked to demonstrate this reset culturally, not just to those who were in the family of God, but everyone that they had debt, relationship with, all of that. And so the spread, the impact of the reset of Jubilee was global. It had a global implication to it. And I think that we're entering as a church into a reset. And that reset ultimately is about grace. What the year Jubilee is grace. That's what it is. Your debt is forgiven. If you're a slave, you're set free. If you have wronged someone, they forgive. It's just a year of grace. It's this reset that happens in the people of God where you can't escape the grace of God. It literally has become every interaction that you have is grace. And I feel like we're stepping into that. We're stepping into a season of grace. There's a reset that's happening. There's a shift that's happening. And I believe it's because God wants to attack what shame is eroding with what the cross has provided. And you might not think you deal with shame, but I promise you, you do. And you can't outrun it. You can't do out of it. You can't achieve out of it. Like, the only way that that gets settled is when you allow God to behold you, to behold him as he's beholding you. And that's kind of how we want to end.
Yeah. Why don't you lead us through like how you learned how to do that?
Yeah.
Even what we did on Tuesday.
Yeah. So, you guys cool? We're just going to roll a little bit. It's like family time. You all right with that? So it helps me if I close my eyes. And what I want you to do is just close your eyes. And the best you know how, and I think this is the cool thing about God, is just like, I want you to imagine him. And whatever that is for you. Like, it can be simple. It doesn't have to be complex, but just imagine him. And I want you just to look at him for a little bit in your mind's eye. And then I want you to allow yourself to receive him looking back at you. And oftentimes what begins to happen when you do this is that you start realizing the parts of your heart that are resistant towards him. Where you start feeling like, oh, no, I don't know. And I want you just to let those things go. And I want you to experience the fire of his gaze. So, Lord, we want to behold you. We want to see you in all of your glory. We want to experience you in your kindness. Lord, your eyes of grace, your hands of mercy. And Lord, I pray that we would hear through your gaze, well done. Well done. That we want to connect to your heart. We want to connect to you, and we want our hearts to be filled with the love you have for us.